God rides into our towns on the backs of our generosity. If we're stingy with our money, and we're stingy with our time, and we're stingy with our talents and our abilities, yada, 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 whatever we're talking about. So I'm about generosity. Don't go with money on me. It's all things, but money's a part of it. God rides into town on the backs of our generosity. So why doesn't God do certain things? Why doesn't God do certain things all kinds of places? I mean, there's a direct correlation to things like obedience. So if we're generous in the area of obedience, right? If we're generous in the area of obedience, we'll see God function differently than if we're not generous in the area of obedience. If we're generous financially, we'll see God function differently than if we're not generous financially. If we're generous in the area of, pick the topic, anything you want to pick, right? If we're externally focused rather than internally focused, you know, being internally focused, you can have a lot of churches are being built based on being internally focused. Like it's our job to make sure everybody in the room's happy, as opposed to our jobs to go ye therefore into the lost world, preaching, teaching, making disciples. You know, seeing the unconvinced transformed to full followers of Christ, that kind of stuff. It's like every time we choose generosity, those are the things that usher in the activity and the work of God where we live at. And if you read the story, so the donkey guy was, you know, he had 2 donkeys. He was generous. I'm going to give him my 2 donkeys. Okay. He gives us 2 donkeys. The disciples then put, you know, well, okay, instead of Jesus sitting on the back of these donkeys, get all, you know, hairy and stuff, we're going to put our cloaks, our jackets, our outer garments on top of that. And then that inspired others to be generous. People started taking their cloaks. I mean, if you read the story, their outer garment, and they put it on the ground so the donkey didn't have to walk on the dirt. He's walking on that. As they ran out of that stuff, okay, people's cloaks, they started cutting tree branches and laying down the palm trees across through there. So they walked across that. It's like the guy being generous inspired others to be generous. The entire crowd became generous because one guy responded. How did it happen? Okay. Jesus says to the disciples, go find the 2 donkeys, bring them to me. The guy chose to be generous, and then generosity was inspired. So how's it happen today? God sends, whether it be through person or through the Holy Spirit, and says, you got something I'd like to use. I'd like you to trust me enough to let me use this. I'd like you to trust me enough to give me this area of your life. I'd like you to trust me enough to give me this area of obedience. I'd like you to trust me enough to step through with this area of commitment. I'd like you to trust me enough to give me this area, this financial thing, whatever it is. I want you to trust me enough to do this thing for me. And we choose to be generous or not be generous. As we choose to be generous, we inspire others to be generous too. A culture of generosity then gets created.